the 49ers starting some joint practices with the Vikings today, so we thought we'd check in with our friend from Purple Insider, my former colleague out there in the Twin Cities, Matthew Coller. Matthew, how are you this afternoon, my man?
I'm doing great. We're going to have to keep like a record of how many different cities and markets and platforms and everything else that we're doing shows on, because I think it's like starting to add up.
It is. Between the two of us, it is starting to add up. But you have been on the Vikings beat that entire time, Matthew Coller, and a guy who's new to the Vikings beat, I guess you could say, Kevin O'Connell, their new head coach. What's been the mood? How different is it from the Zim era in Minneapolis?
I think a lot in terms of the vibe of training camp. But, part of that is also circumstance. It's the person, it's also the situation.
Sure.
Because Mike Zimmer went into every season past 2017 with a ton of pressure. When they signed Kirk Cousins, it was pressure to go back to the NFC Championship. And then after they didn't, it was pressure to keep his job. And they were desperately making moves year after year to try to find that last player or rebuild this or rebuild that to try to get back to where they were in 2017. So Zimmer, he had to deal with the pandemic season, which was absolutely nuts, but also in 2020, the Vikings revamped their whole defense. So there was that. And then 2021, it's hot seat. It was like official hot seat season for him. And then his quarterback, ends up on the COVID list a couple days into practice, and Zimmer decides to burn down the whole building. Right. So it's different when you're the first time guy. Everybody likes all the things that you're doing. And, but you can also see a very different approach. Part of it is a little more scientific approach when it comes to player health. Like, they have a day off today. I'm out walking the dog, as my dog Nora,
Mm-hmm.
and
Nora.
that would not be what I was doing right now under Mike Zimmer, because I can't remember ever a team that he coached getting 2 days in a row off from practice during training camp. It just did not happen. Zimmer would push the team extremely hard, and I think that it wore them down. And if you look at their record toward the end of seasons, maybe there's something to that. So their scientific approach. Also, you don't hear Kevin O'Connell MFing people all the time during practice, which look, a lot of coaches do, right? A lot of coaches do. But O'Connell has taken just a different approach to that. They're like, we're not going to yell and scream at everybody when they make a mistake, and we're going to address it kind of behind closed doors in the film sessions. And I think that the players also having a say in what they're doing, having a more collaborative effort, which is what they've talked about, it seems like that's coming to fruition. All of those things are what the players wanted when they fired Mike Zimmer, and I think so far they're getting exactly what they wanted from Kevin O'Connell.
When you and I used to sit in a studio together and talk Vikings football, I said many times, I think that trio of Spielman, Zimmer, and Cousins, whether people in that trio liked it or not, were attached at the hip. And when the era ended for one, that three dominoes would fall, and it would be the end of all three of those guys with the Vikings. Were you surprised that it was just two of the three and Kirk Cousins is still the quarterback?
Yes, I was surprised, because I thought the same thing as you. I thought that you couldn't continue with the quarterback that got everyone fired. Just realistically, what is it that determines whether you're going to succeed or fail? It's the performance of your quarterback. And so I think what they wanted to do was either get back in some sort of insane trade package for Kirk Cousins, because we know that they attempted to shop Kirk Cousins. So if somebody had come in with, we're going to give you a first and a third, I think that they would have pulled the trigger there. But if we look at what Carson Wentz or what Matt Ryan was traded for, people were not paying huge money. And even like Baker Mayfield, right? Jimmy Garoppolo still hasn't been traded. Like, people were not paying huge dollars for available quarterbacks in the trade market when it came to draft capital. So I think that they weren't satisfied with the offers that they got. And they said, well, why don't we extend him for the shortest amount of term possible? And then we can just see, like, how much was Zimmer's fault is really what you could kind of put the tagline, like on those old NFL films recaps, there's like some tagline, like restore the roar or something, like everyone's saying about Detroit. Like, it would be like, was it Zimmer's fault for this year? Is kind of what they're looking for, because a lot of the other things stayed the same. The overall roster construction pretty much stayed the same. The quarterback stayed the same. I think that the right guard position is the only offensive position that is actually different. So they are like hardcore testing this theory. Was it Mike Zimmer's fault because he never really bought into Kirk Cousins?
a lot was made of the whole Zimmer Cousins relationship, and who knows how much of that is real and how much of that is creations of us in the media. But any noticeable difference in Kirk Cousins, either in his mood, his vibe, or in what you get to see on the practice field and what they're asking him to do with the football?
I mean, to quote Seinfeld, it was real and it was spectacular. The differences of opinions from Mike Zimmer and Kirk Cousins, they did not see eye to eye. But the question is how much of that actually matters, because they had Gary Kubiak, they had Kevin Stefanski, they had good offenses that were by design to help Kirk Cousins. They ran the ball very successfully. They had great wide receivers. I mean, it was not a perfect offensive line, but it was like, far from a terrible offensive setup, especially with the success from the running game and then the emergence of Justin Jefferson as a superstar. So the question is being more collaborative with Kirk, is being nicer to Kirk, getting his feedback a little more, believing in him a little more. Like, do these things actually result in wins? And from my perspective, you're going to have to show that to me, because I think when a quarterback is 34 years old, and we have done this for this long with Cousins, like, what if you just gave him this, or what if you just did that for him? And it's still the same results over and over again. And from training camp, I mean, he looks like Kirk Cousins, right? Like, where there's some spectacular, super accurate throws, and then there are other times where it looks like something went a little haywire there. And I expect that to be similar, but they are running basically the Los Angeles Rams offense here, and you can't ask for much better than that. For expected points added last year, LA was number 1 in the league. I think they actually have improved what they can do with the offensive line, with Christian Darrisaw emerging and performing really well in training camp at left tackle. So, like, there's, I think whatever results happen, we're going to decide how much of it was Zimmer's fault. But you could end up getting just circumstances determining it one way or another. If there's injuries, it might look worse. Or if there's an easy schedule, it might look better. It's kind of hard to pick those things apart. But I tend to think that Kirk is going to be Kirk.
I know you're going to get a look at the 49ers this week and the joint practices between these two teams. We almost every day here on the show, we take a ride on the Trey Lance hype train, because he is the subject of discussion almost anywhere people are talking football, Matthew. And of course, they're not like middle of the road opinions on Trey Lance and what he'll be. He's either going to win the MVP or be a bust, according to most people who you hear talk about him. You cover the Vikings, but I know you watch all the football, and you're the most football-y football man that I talk to on a regular basis. What are your thoughts on Trey Lance as a quarterback prospect?
Yeah, well, from that perspective, let's move Kyle Juszczyk up from the 100th best player in the league, shall we, folks? Because that's going to be Trey Lance's best friend. No, really, I think that there is the potential there in his skill set, his talent, to be a great quarterback. Now, that's always comes with a bunch of different caveats, with, like, if this happens or if that happens and so forth. But when you talk about arm strength, explosiveness, situation, which matters a ton. I mean, you dropped, a Zach Wilson last year into one of the worst teams in the league, and then his receivers get hurt. And like, what did you guys expect from this player, right? I think there will be bumps along the way. And I guess what I would look at it as the potential to have kind of a Josh Allen trajectory, where early on we questioned Josh Allen because it wasn't the most accurate. The processing wasn't totally there yet. And they won like 10 games, but he didn't have good statistics. And the fans were all about it, but there was outside skeptics. But then ultimately it was the skill set, the talent, the arm strength, the speed, the competitiveness that shined through with Josh Allen, and he was able to elevate his play to become one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, which, initially we didn't predict, but I think that there will be more quarterbacks that are sort of like this because they're going to be drafted on their raw athleticism, which he has. I mean, if you were starting a team right now and you couldn't get any quarterback who's already been a Pro Bowler or something, like, where's Trey Lance ranked? Probably pretty high on that, based on his skill set, his lack of experience, that you think he's just going to get better and better. But then also the fact that he gets Kyle Shanahan to go, with him. So I think that the potential exists for him to have a really good season. And by the end of the year, we're saying, like, wow, the 49ers absolutely nailed it. Of course, it's possible that doesn't happen. But when you talk about the upside of someone and the situation where you get dropped into a good team with a fantastic offensive line for a coach, playmakers around him, a running game that they could succeed with. Like I think there's just a lot for going for Trey Lance.
Oh, that Better Call Saul finale was pretty awesome last night.
Oh, so good. So good. I mean, after last night, like how many shows have completely botched the final season?
Yeah.
Right.
No, you're right.
I mean, they just nailed it. They just nailed it. I wouldn't change a thing. And to have Jimmy McGill, the real Jimmy, come out at the biggest moment, like we always ask sports players to do, shine in your biggest moment, Jimmy. Yeah. I mean, I just thought like they brought everything together. I was almost like proud of the writers. So many people have botched the final seasons. Like you guys did it. You guys did it. I was almost more relieved than I was like thrilled last night. Like, yeah, thank you guys, because you could have really left a bad taste in my mouth, but instead, probably my favorite show ever.
You nailed it. You nailed it in this interview, Matthew Coller. PurpleInsider.com is where you can find him. Follow him on Twitter at Matthew Coller. Yeah, he covers the Vikings, but he eats, lives, breathes, sleeps football, and he'll tweet about Better Call Saul and other TV shows you probably love. My guest for the last few minutes. Thank you, Matthew. We'll talk again sometime.
Yep, sounds good, man. Thanks for having me.
There's Matthew Coller joining me. Our stop in